All right, we are now at Module 6 of Hazardous Material and Dangerous Goods Training, and this is the shipping papers. So this is something that you may not be filling out the final shipping papers, but because you're filling out the dangerous goods list, the shipping papers are actually prepared from that and the information you give. So this is an understanding of what the forwarder or the carrier is actually having to prepare to make sure that the shipment is done correctly. We are, heading towards the final stretch. Definitely get your highlighter out for this one. A lot of information. You're going to be hearing the bell at least 10 times in this module. There's a lot of data in here that leads back to the others, because really all the stuff we were doing before and kind of explained before rolls into doing the shipping papers. So what we are looking at is a shipping paper. Just so, what is a shipping paper? It's any document or data set, because we are in the electronic world now, that contains information on hazardous materials or dangerous goods. So this could be anything from a dangerous goods declaration, motor carrier's bill of lading, your truck bill, your instructions to the ocean carrier, the actual ocean bill of lading they issue, or a manifest that the steamship line prepares. The manifest contains a hazardous goods, just so you know, on the ocean side, contains the section for hazardous goods specifically, and all of that is given to the Coast Guard prior to any vessel being able to depart or any vessel being able to arrive into a port. The Coast Guard looks over that, so they're responsible for that information. So so when we talk about the shipping papers, again, it's not as detailed as the dangerous goods declaration, some of the things, but for others it's more detailed. So slightly difference between the two. The dangerous goods declaration, only the hazardous goods or dangerous goods go on that document, the dangerous goods declaration, because that's its name, dangerous goods declaration. So the shipping papers, though, contain all of the information that's in that shipment or on that shipment. So it's everything in that container. So hazardous and the non-hazardous are there. So what do you do about that? Well, there's one basic rule to always think of when you're preparing your shipping papers is the hazardous is listed first. So you look at your hazardous before you input or prepare it. You put all your hazardous first, and then you go down and you list your non-hazardous items afterwards. So that is important because the carriers are going to want to see the hazardous information first. Now, there are a couple of other options that you could have, but I don't know of anyone that uses these anymore. One is that your document, the hazardous information can be in a contrasting color. I don't think any of us use color printers to prepare shipping papers. Plus, with it being electronic, so much of the data now, there is no color in data. So that really doesn't apply anymore. Or in the really old days, this will age you, on the truck bills, there used to be a column, a little tiny skinny column right next to the description of the goods that had HM for hazardous material. And you could put an X through there. That means it could be anywhere on the document, but if there was an X next to it, it signified it was hazardous. But again, I haven't seen one of those columns in years. It still's in the regulations, but basically just remember your hazardous comes first, and just get used to doing that when a shipping paper is prepared. The next thing, really basic and simple, is it must be in English. So that's good. We speak English here. We're pretty lucky there. I have seen though, countries, China, one of them, is starting to require for imports a dangerous goods declaration that's in their local language. So we're not responsible for preparing those over here. The regulation says English. If that's something that the agent overseas or the steamship line overseas has to translate that and put it into Chinese, that's their responsibility. It's not yours. So if you ever have anybody come back and say, okay, I want this in German, or I want this in Spanish, or I want this in Chinese, it's like, then you need to do it because the regulations say that they must be in English. So the pages must be numbered, similar to your dangerous goods declaration. So if you have a 3-page bill of lading, ocean bill, it needs to be marked 1 of 3, 2 of 3, 3 of 3. Important just to make sure people have all the information. The sequence. So we go back to the basic description. And again, the basic description is the core of everything that we're doing. The basic description must be in order. It has to be in the right sequence. So that is the UN number, the proper shipping name, the hazard class, and the packing group. So that is your core basic description. And no ifs, ands, or buts about that. We talked about the emergency response number a little bit on the last one. And just so you know, it's some of the core stuff is that, you know, you have to be available, someone has to be available 24/7 to be able to answer any questions if there is an incident. So that is some companies, some chemical manufacturers actually have the emergency response number of somebody at their facility. So, you know, if they're running their plant operation 24/7 with 3 shifts, someone's always going to be there, maybe in that department, in their safety department, and they can save the cost of hiring a third party to do it. 95% of companies hire a third party, like Chemtrek. I believe Mercedes has Chemtrex at the Vance plant facility. CCUSA has InfoTrack. They do it at the Woodruff and some other facilities where they have hazmat. So that's just something that, you know, the person who answers the phone has to be knowledgeable. It can't be like, I'm calling you back, because they're calling you because there's an incident. So there's fire or flaming in the backgrounds or fumes burning out or whatever. And then this document must go on the shipping paper. It only has to go on there once unless you have several different ones. So if, for example, I do not think this happens, but if you loaded some dangerous goods at plant 1, which subscribes to Chemtrek, and you then move that container over to CCUSA facility and they use InfoTrack and they loaded some dangerous goods, now you would have 2 different emergency response numbers, and they must go immediately below what those items were that were loaded from that facility. So you're doing the same things, but just in case, sometimes I believe plant 1 deals with more hazardous commodities than CCUSA does. So that's just something to keep an eye on if you are loading a container at multiple facilities, but I don't think you're really doing that. So, but if you are, it's something that your hazardous department needs to consider and make sure they're pretty clear of whoever's handling that shipping, the shipping papers. So the other thing is, if it's loading at 2 places, of course, not of course, but the person who is the last person to load that container and seal that container is the one that needs to complete and sign the packing certificate. So we don't want that twice. We can't have 2 different people on there from the plant. So if it loaded at plant 1 first and then was moved over to CCUSA, the CCUSA designated person would have to be the one who's signed the container packing certificate, so on the dangerous goods declaration. Additional information that needs to be on here, you're going to need your weights. You're going to need, of course, you always need a gross weight of knowing exactly what that container weighs when it leaves the facility. that's put over on one side, but in the body and the description, usually following the basic description, like I said, UN, proper shipping name, hazard class, packing group. Following that is the net quantity, and that is the either the mass or volume of the actual hazardous goods. Now, for most of your items, it is the weight of whatever that product is. So fortunately, for like an airbag that's a safety device, you don't have to get into what that actual element inside weighs. You have to have the weight of that safety device net without any packaging whatsoever. The difference in what you have to report, if something is a solid, then they want the mass, which is reported in kilos. So that is how it needs to be reported. So your metric system is used in this area. If it's a liquid, most of your things are solid, but you do have some flammable liquids, I believe in plant one, that you may be shipping. That is reported in volume. So that is by liters. So you've got to make sure when you're talking about liquids, you're talking about just the liquids itself. So it's no packaging material, and you have to make sure. So the thing you got to go by as a double check, you should always be looking at, because this is something I know the steamship lines check all the time. Customs checks this also when you're reporting data. Your net quantity is always underneath your gross quantity. The exception to that is when you're shipping something without any packaging. If you have like a huge turbine or something like that, it's going directly on a flat rack, something, your net and your gross is going to be the same. But again, unless you're doing some big machinery or some big apparatus that you don't have to package and is self-contained, the net quantity is always going to be, when it's in weight, lower than that. And again, this is where your common sense comes in. If you've got something, you've got to kind of picture it, making sure that, something may be in milliliters in your system, but you pick it up as liters, and all of a sudden you show you have 480,000 liters in a container. Doesn't make sense. That's a little common sense thing. So sometimes when you're looking at your reporting quantity, you really got to make sure you understand and kind of get a physical perception of what that is. Harder for me, older than I am. I was one of those ones of the age, and if you're in your 50s, you remember that every year we were told the metric system is coming. We're going to have to totally change the way we think, change the way we do, and it never came. So we never got that core base of understanding and visualizing some of these things. So it's still difficult for me sometimes to know exactly what a centimeter is or what a milliliter is. And I'm thinking of, okay, give it to me in inches or give it to me in ounces, and then I can picture it. If something says it's 8 ounces of fluid, I can picture what that is. So if you're saying it is 0.5 liters, a little bit more difficult, or 500 milliliters is even harder for me. A half a liter, I'm used to now. A half a liter is 33 ounces, a little bit bigger than a quart, but I'm still back in the old quart days. So that's where you get a little bit of that visualization too, and that's kind of a common sense thing. That's a big flag that it just needs to make sense sometimes, and not all the people working out on a line that may be doing some of these things know that, and that's not common sense to them. So you just want to make sure they kind of know what that means. That that package right there, it should be a weight of about 3 pounds, or say 1.4 kilograms, or whatever it might be. So on your shipping papers, again, you have to put the shipper certification, and the people that are preparing the shipping papers can't really certify that everything's been packaged, labeled, marked correctly, because it's a closed seal container. So what we do, who prepare the shipping papers, we depend on the certification on the dangerous goods declaration. So we take that information. We are then acting as the agent for that company, so we're allowed to sign that on their behalf. And again, if you're doing international, your system, there are 2 shipper certifications out there that can be used. One is exclusively for domestic. The other one is for domestic or international. What we did a couple of years ago, we went fine-tooth comb through our system, and everywhere that one that was just for domestic was, we deleted it from our system. So there wasn't any question of what certification that you're doing. It's best because this one is dual purpose. It can be used for both. And you read the end of it, and it's, according to applicable international and national government regulations. So just more than likely, you're doing a dangerous goods declaration, and yours, I see, has the international statement on it. So you're perfectly fine. The IATA dangerous goods declaration has the international on it also. But they're also good, even though they're the international ones, they are good for domestic. So why have 2 in your system when one works? So you've got some additional information that goes on your shipping paper. This doesn't really come into play with your commodities except for the flammable liquids that could be shipped, and a flammable liquid is a class 3. It's, of course, flammable, but it has a flash point, and the flash point determines at what temperature, when it's ignited or a spark is hit against it, it could catch on fire. So that needs to be reported. People need to identify that. I mean, think about it. If you receive something in a warehouse, you may have a warehouse that is air conditioned in one area or temperature controlled in one area and not in another area. And the temperatures could get, say, above 90 degrees, 100 degrees in that area on certain days, and you've got a flash point of 84 degrees Fahrenheit. Why would you put that in that situation when you can put it in a controlled environment, and you've got somewhere that if it does spill or there is an incident, it's 70 degrees in there, 72 degrees, and it's not going to catch on fire. So that's important on the shipping papers, because it lets anyone who's handling that cargo know certain precautions they may take for handling and storing the goods. So on anything flammable, the question is, okay, where do you get the flash point from? Go back, should be on your safety data sheet in sections 5 or 9. Those are the fire measures, and then the properties and observations section of the safety data sheet. So that's something should be set up in your system. If you've got your system that if you put an X next to, 1263 paint, and it spits out UN 1263 paint, class 3, packing group 2, your description should pop out FP, say 84 degrees. Now your flash point, and I'm jumping over that since I started talking about it, and go ahead and finish up with it. It can be Celsius or Fahrenheit. Pick one. If you've got multiple commodities, strongly suggest that you pick Celsius. It's just a little bit clearer and easier. Fahrenheit for flammable goods can go up to 140 degrees. So that means that you need three data fields, 3 digits in that, as opposed to Celsius, you need 2. It's never going to go over 100 degrees, or, but by that time it's not considered flammable at all. So we use Celsius. And if you're ever typing something on a typewriter, here's just a little side note or whatever. But don't know if you use your Alt keys that often for certain symbols that's not on a regular keyboard. If you're looking for the degree sign, hold on a second. Hold on a second. I see little technical difficulties. So I'll just keep going. So device settings. Okay, that should be better, or I'm going to have to re-record this whole thing and I'm going to be really angry. So the getting back to, I lost my train of thought on your Celsius Fahrenheit. Where was I? Sorry, lost that thought. So I'll come back to it in a second. So, oh, I'm sorry, finding it. And that leads back to your safety data sheet, which, of course, I said in section 5 or section 9, your supplier of the goods that you're buying it from, it should be on their documents when it came in. So you can always go back to that resource to find out what it is. You have to check on something like paint. Different paints can have different flash points. Talked about that before, depending on, what materials are used to make the paint. So every time you have a different product line or SKU number or whatever you call it, your product code, it could have a different flash point based on the chemical makeup of that paint. Another thing that could appear on your documents, we've talked about it a few times, are the subsidiary risks or label codes. This is for mixtures. This is where on the dangerous goods list, it has the second column for that of your subsidiary risk or your label codes, and it will list if there's more than one of them there. This is for when you have two chemicals, the manufacturer is making a new product or making a product and they use more chemicals to mix together. It could be corrosive, could be flammable, or both. And when they're mixed together, you determine whether or not there is a subsidiary risk or not. And like I said, you can't just go by, oh, I see this product is a class 8 and this one's a class 3. Well, it could depend on the percentage. You might only have 3% of a class 3, and when it's mixed with the 90% corrosive, the flammable characteristics aren't strong enough that it will ignite under 140 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's not classified as an actual flammable liquid anymore, and it doesn't have a subsidiary risk. So again, this is all from the supplier of getting that data. On the shipping paper, remember that subsidiary risk follows the hazard class in parentheses. So if it was a corrosive, you would have class 8, and in parentheses afterward, you'd have a 3 inside the parentheses. Plus all of your items, just so you know, all your items are separated by commas. So you put a UN number, comma, proper shipping name, comma. You don't have to put a comma between the proper shipping name and the technical name because that all groups together. Same with the hazard class and subsidiary class. It would just be class 8, parentheses, 3, and then close parentheses, comma, and then your packing group. And if you've got more information, comma after that, and then something else. So just indicating that there's a break there. Technical names, we talked about this before, and technical names are the question of that is, how do I know? Because I've referred to them as NOS, but that's not 100% accurate. There are some commodities that require a technical name, but it doesn't have NOS in the proper shipping name. That is totally possible. And you've got ones that are NOS that don't require a proper shipping name. So the NOSs are very general categories that a lot of commodities that can fall into. Certain ones and names have very specific characteristics that the incident response or emergency response is all the same for all of them. So that further detail might not be needed on those. But we talked about it when we went over the dangerous goods list. Your first column on your hazardous material table in the 49 CFR is symbols. And for symbols, remember there can be different letters in there or whatever, but the one that you're really looking for is the letter G. And G stands for generic, but it just basically means it needs a technical name. So that's where you find it in the 49 CFR on the hazardous material table. In IMDG, you find there is no column 1 for symbols, so you find this in the special provisions, which is column number 6. And if one of the special provisions is number 274, then it needs a technical name there. So it doesn't stick out as much as the 49 CFR does. There's also a list of them in one of the appendixes of all the commodities that require a technical name. Just best to get used to that number 274. That's a number you're looking for of whether or not you need that or not in any of your commodities. So the other thing about the words, you can use the words contains or containing just like you could with the proper shipping name. You can say in parentheses contains benzene. That's okay. It can contain the percentage. It say contains 50% benzene or whatever. If that's needed for you to better identify the product, if you've got multiple concentration ranges just that you're shipping of the same product, you want to put that on the shipping paper because, like I said, the idea is to be able to identify what the response measures are as quickly as possible if there is an incident. And there can be more than one technical name. Sometimes you've got a flammable liquid that has two different flammable liquids that are mixed together and they're above a certain percentage, whatever that is for that. And they both need to be reported. If it said contains benzene and acetone or something like that, they both can be there. So there can be more than one. I've never seen really more than two as far as needing that. But again, your technical names, if you've got any commodities, which let me just look real quick and see. I should have had this sheet out. It's going to help me. And I'm not finding it on the dangerous goods list. Oh, here it is. So looking down all of your commodities, you've got the, I don't see any that have 274 in the special provision, so you probably will not have to worry about that. The only time you might is if you get some flammable liquids in, and a lot of times it will fall under that UN number 1993, which is flammable liquids NOS. And then of course you're going to need one for that because that is probably the biggest category out there, or proper shipping name that covers a lot of different commodities. So that was a lot about the technical name, but y'all don't really have any of those commodities, but it's important to know that it's possible that you might. So the other information is that you might have is if you're able to ship your goods in limited quantity. Now, unfortunately, the safety devices and the articles pressurized like the struts, those do not have a limited quantity. They all have to be reported. So that's really not an option for your core things. Your batteries also don't have a limited quantity, I don't believe. But we'll look into that under the automotive product type to see if those are needed or not. But it does reduce some of the requirements you have on how you have to package it. Companies really like to be able to ship in limited quantities. Steamship lines usually will accept almost all limited quantities of the goods. But not everything has a limited quantity, like explosives. Explosives are explosives. There are no limited quantities of explosives. If it can explode, it explodes. So it just depends on what division it is. So basically what you would do is after your basic description, you would put shipped in limited quantities spelled out. Here, they allow an abbreviation. You can use the abbreviation LTY, QTY. So that is a possibility out there if you're ever shipping some of these. It is possible paint has limited quantities. So it is possible if you're returning any of these, or if you're receiving paint in certain quantities that are small quantities, like something like if you have a touch-up paint or something like that, and I don't know if y'all have those in your facility. the little tiny things of it, you might, I don't know. But if you have those, I know you sell them, but if you have those might be received in, and you might be wondering, wait a minute, why doesn't this have any kind of labels or placards on when I received it for this paint? But if they're all small receptacles, they could be being shipped in limited quantities, and you don't require any of that. So, but it still needs to appear on your shipping paper. So, for people preparing the shipping papers, we're not real fond of limited quantity just because it's more information that goes on the document. And we live by the rule less is more on our documents. So again, that's something that needs to be discussed if you're actually starting to move limited quantities. You'd want to make sure you know if you are, because you want to take advantage of all those things. And that we'll get a little bit more into on the next module on marking, labeling, and packaging, because it might not, your thought may be, well, what's the difference if I can just stick one of these labels on each one? Well, those labels cost money. Those placards cost money. Each, not a lot, but when you start adding up, if you're moving 1 million pieces through your facility and each label costs 25 cents, that's $250,000. So those are the little savings. And if you could save that on every single commodity that went through there, or a large portion of it, you're talking about potential millions of dollars. And then on top of that, providing the best packaging or the most efficient packaging to not go overboard, because packaging, of which that department will tell you, this stuff is expensive. So it's not real cheap. So they don't like, I know our company doesn't like when you walk back down and you just like throw a box out that is a good box, and because it's got a value to it. We've already talked about Flashpoint. Celsius or Fahrenheit, both of them are acceptable. I prefer Celsius myself, but that's up to you. Oh, that's what I was going to tell you. I remember when it all came back to me. So if you're typing your document and you've got to put the degree symbol in there, just in case you didn't know, there's a lot of symbols. They're called alt codes. There's you can just Google the word alt code table and it'll give you all of them. But if you want to type the degree sign on something from your keypad, you just hold down the alt key and hit 0174. I use that one a lot. So just a little trick. If you're wondering, God, how can I see other people preparing these documents and I see all these symbols, and where do I find these, how are they making these symbols? Look up your alt codes. They can be really helpful on some things, like you want to put a little star next to something like that. You can do that in a keypad setting. Probably not telling you anything new, but for people my age, it was a revelation for typing when I found alt codes. So the next thing we have are marine pollutants. And by the way, that when I say your Flashpoint can be in Celsius or Fahrenheit, it's good to remember that. Marine pollutants. So there's some products out there that when they are in water, they can kill fish, they can kill plants. We're becoming a lot more environmentally friendly in the world. So we want to take every measure possible to retrieve that cargo if it's in water as soon as possible. So we kind of need to know what we're dealing with. So, and we're not just talking about oceans, we're talking about rivers also. Oceans, you're not going to be able to go get that container if it falls off in the middle of the ocean, but no matter what it is, if it mixes with the water, with that much water, it's going to be fine. But say a river, you're on, your truck driving over a bridge, huge gust of wind hits you, thing falls over. Sorry, let's see if I'm still recording. There was a little blip in the system. But it falls over into the water, and it's a marine pollutant. They need to know that right away, because if they need to block that river, wherever the water's flowing, they're going to try to block that river wherever possible to contain any of that polluted water before it destroys the entire river. So marine pollutants are important. There's a list of them. There on the 49 CFR, you actually have to go to the list to find it. So it's one of those you have to have on your checklist when you're preparing your papers, which I'll by the way. I need to send you that checklist. I realize that I did not put that on your exhibits. Little note there. And in the 49 CFR, right behind, following the hazardous material table, which is in section 172.101, behind that is Appendix B, and those are your marine pollutants. So if it's listed there, and you need to report it as a marine pollutant. So, and those, just the words marine pollutant follows that basic description somewhere. So once you get past that basic description, because I'm telling you, it's like, okay, you need to put a flash point there. You need to put a marine pollutant. There could be some other things. You need to put your net weight there. So once you get past that basic description, it doesn't matter what order they're in. I do the same kind of order every time. So you just need to pick your order to be consistent so you don't forget what it is. So that's one of those kind of one and done things though with marine pollutants. You just need to look at your commodities and then go look and see, look up on that list and check off any that are there, and somewhere you need to put that in your system or make a note of it. We were talking about templates before. If you happen to be making a template, and I would put things like, say if it was 3468 and it was a flammable liquid, I would put like under that on my template flashpoint or FP. And then if it was also a marine pollutant, I would go ahead and put a comma, type out the word marine pollutant. So when I went on there, I wouldn't have to look this up again. I already know which one's the marine pollutant. It's this one, and it's already on my document. So it'll remind me to put it on that document and I don't forget it. So then I'm just typing out the basic description or any information that might be different. So up to you on how you set that up. But in the IMDG, you need to go and look in column 4, which are your subsidiary codes, your subsidiary labels. And if there's a letter P for pollutant, you will find it in that column. So again, I don't recall any of y'all's items being a marine pollutant, but it is something, like I said, this list isn't like perfect of what is possible out there, but that's just something you need to be able to look up and check just in case to see if it applies or not to all the commodities that you're dealing with. And we'll probably get into that, well, not probably, in module number 8 when we talk about the automotive products, because we are going to be given a breakdown of each one. So that one we are going to kind of be going back and forth on the tables. So few other ones that you aren't dealing with. You could be dealing with the first one, empty, uncleaned, or residue last contained. Sometimes you get things in drums, you use it all, you don't have a way of cleaning that at your facility, so you return the drums back to the person who shipped it to you, and you return it back to them with just some residue of the hazardous or it being unclean. So you do need to indicate that it is still a hazardous commodity, because if there's a little bit of flammable liquid in there, then it's still flammable. So you got to be careful with that. Most of your stuff, like it wouldn't apply. Mostly it's liquid materials that would be there, or something like a real powdery that was shipped in bulk in drums, things like that. But we're not talking about like safety devices that were broken or damaged or whatever. That would be considered salvage material, and that you don't really have to worry about when you're talking about empty, unclean. So, but if you do, just the words empty, unclean appears before the proper shipping name. So it just lets them know. I mean, you get there to an incident and you've got something, you leave those words off, and you get there and they're like, and you're returning, 80 drums to a facility and they're all empty, unclean, but you've got the hazardous information on there, and they show up and all the drums are empty, they're going to think everything's spilled out. They could totally change the way they respond to something like that. So if you are doing empty receptacles, it is important to make sure that they are marked correctly with an empty label on the packages and that the shipping papers show that they are empty. Waste, again, that's a whole nother division of some things. Don't need to worry about that. Really, there's just, you need totally separate training for waste, so I won't go into it. But as you know, waste, they do a really close follow-up to where this waste ends up. So, and then elevated temperature substances, don't know if the plant receives any of these in or if they ever have to ship something out, but basically some hazardous materials or any materials have to be, only can be shipped in a elevated temperature. So basically you wouldn't want it to harden if it possibly could solidify. So you are in a tank, rail tank car, that's how they're usually shipped. And say it's up to a certain temperature if it's over 100 degrees Celsius and is in a liquid state, you need to show that on the shipping papers, and that transport unit will have to have the word hot on it, just so that someone doesn't think, oh my God, I don't know what's in there, but there's a chemical reaction or something going on and this thing is really bad. So it does happen. I don't think y'all are doing any of those things like that. So you just put the word hot in front of the proper shipping name. So again, this is just data. This wasn't as long of a module as I thought, because really the next module, well, the packing and labeling, but the automotive parts, that's going to probably be the longer module, because I want to show you exactly where that information comes for each commodity. So for today, we get to let you get out a little bit early, and we are done. And next is packing, marking, and labeling. So see y'all then.